Wyoming Territory, late January, 1877. The sky had turned to iron. Snow hissed sideways across the high ridge of Crow's Head, swallowing sound, biting through wool and skin alike. Jeremiah Cole leaned low in the saddle, his coat crusted with frost, his breath a pale ribbon trailing behind him. The horse's hooves cracked through ice that wasn't meant to hold weight. For miles there had been nothing, no light, no life until the wind carried a sound that didn't belong to this wilderness. It came again, faint but sharp, a cry so thin it might have been the last sound left in the world. Not the wind, not an animal. Something smaller, closer to breaking. Jeremiah reined in nightfall, the horse snorting steam into the dark, ears twitching toward the timberline. There, between gusts, another wail. Then two, then three. His heart stumbled once in his chest before he moved. He swung down, boots sinking ankle-deep in powder, and led the horse by the reins through the trees. The cold pressed against him like a living thing. Branches bowed low under ice, shedding flakes that whispered down his collar. The sound drew him forward, trembling, insistent, like a thread he couldn't see but had to follow. The clearing opened sudden, a wound in the forest. An old fence post jutted from the drift, half buried, half broken, and against it, a woman. She was upright only because the barbed wire had bitten deep enough to hold her there. Her dress hung in frozen tatters, her face gray-blue except where bruises bloomed dark as plums. At her feet lay 3 tiny bundles, twitching with the faintest life. Jeremiah stopped breathing. The world narrowed to the sound of their whimpers and the hiss of the storm. He moved before thought could form. The knife came from his boot. The wire split with a soft, metallic groan. When the woman fell forward, he caught her. She was lighter than his coat, heavy only with the cold. Her lashes were webbed with ice, her lips cracked. "Don't let them take my daughters," she whispered, voice splintering like dry wood. He didn't ask who they were. There would be time, or there wouldn't. Either way, he wouldn't leave them here. He stripped off his gloves, tested the smallest child's breath against his wrist. Shallow, but there. He tucked all 3 inside his coat, close to his chest, the way you'd carry kindling you meant to turn into fire. Then he lifted the woman, one arm beneath her knees, the other around her back. "Hold on," he said quietly, though she was half gone to sleep, maybe half gone to something beyond it. The trail down was steep, the wind against him, and every few steps the snow gave way to hidden ice. Nightfall groaned under the weight, but Jeremiah kept moving. His hands had gone numb. His shoulders burned. The cold had a voice of its own, whispering reasons to stop. He didn't listen. Somewhere behind him, the wire creaked in the storm, metal shifting in the dark, and it sounded almost like laughter. By the time the cabin's roof appeared through the snow, his breath was a ragged rasp. The chimney was cold, no smoke, no light, just the shape of home waiting, like a test. He kicked the door open with his boot and carried them inside, into the dark that smelled of ash and wood oil. He laid the woman near the hearth, the babies beside her. His hands shook as he struck the flint, once, twice, until the spark caught. Flame flared, small and golden, and the room came alive inch by inch. Walls rough-hewn, shelves of empty jars, a hanging lantern blackened with soot. The light crawled across his face, showing a man hollow-eyed but steady. He fed the fire dry pine until the crackle grew strong enough to drown the wind. Then he knelt beside the woman again. Her pulse fluttered weak beneath his fingers. He brushed the ice from her hair, and something like breath moved through him. Not relief, not yet, but the promise of it. Outside, the storm screamed against the walls. Inside, the only sound was the fire's slow chew of wood, and the faint sigh of 3 newborns wrapped in his coat. Jeremiah sat back on his heels, staring into the flame until his vision blurred. He hadn't meant to find anyone tonight. He hadn't meant to care again. But the snow was already covering his tracks, and somewhere out there, a single horse moved through the white, unseen. Night fell heavy over Coal Ridge. The cabin crouched against the storm, its walls creaking as if the wind meant to tear them apart. Jeremiah pushed the door shut with his shoulder, sealing the darkness out, or trying to. Inside, the air was still, and bit with the same cold that had followed him in. His breath ghosted white as he lowered Naomi Hearth onto a bed of folded quilts near the hearth. Her body sagged, limp, a pale shape under his coat. The 3 infants made small, uncertain sounds, the kind of cries that came from the edge of life. He struck the flint again. Sparks leapt and vanished. The 3rd one caught. A tongue of flame licked the kindling, then another. The fire woke slow, feeding on the pine he'd split months ago, back when the nights were long but not yet cruel. Light crawled up the walls, turning the rough timber gold. Smoke curled through the chimney, trailing the smell of resin and dust. Jeremiah worked in silence. He pulled a tin pot from the shelf, poured in goat's milk left in a jug near the window, half frozen, but enough. The fire hissed at the touch of it. He found a small spoon, the one he'd carved from maple long ago, and set it beside the pot. Then he knelt by the babies. Their skin was cold enough to hurt his fingertips. He slid his coat aside, unwrapping them one by one, pressing each tiny hand to his chest until he felt the faint pulse answer his own. The woman stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, lashes clumped with frost. Where are they?" she whispered, the words barely a breath. "Here," he said. "They're here." She tried to lift her head, failed. The firelight flickered across her face, bruises blooming, lips cracked, a single bead of blood at the corner of her mouth. Jeremiah took a rag, dipped it in the warm water he'd set by the flames, and wiped the blood away. Her skin felt like porcelain left outside in winter, time 900 moon. He didn't speak again. Words had never been his way. He fed the fire instead, added another log, watched the shadows retreat from the corners. The warmth began to gather, slow but sure, and for the first time since the ridge, he heard the storm outside rather than felt it. The milk was ready. He tested a drop on his wrist, then crouched beside the smallest child. She took the spoon awkwardly, more air than swallow, but she drank. The second followed. The third only whimpered, mouth too weak to open. Jeremiah rubbed her back gently with 2 fingers, a steady rhythm, until she drew in a fragile breath and began to sip. The sound was so small it nearly broke him. When he looked up, Naomi was watching. Her eyes, fever bright in the dim, held both fear and wonder. "You shouldn't have," she rasped. Jeremiah met her gaze. "Didn't think about it." She gave a soft, shuddering laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. "They'll come for me." He didn't ask who. The way she said it told enough. Instead, he reached for a blanket and covered her shoulders. "Rest now." For a long while, neither spoke. The wind pressed against the walls. The fire cracked, throwing sparks up the chimney. Somewhere deep in the night, a shutter banged once, then again, before settling still. Jeremiah sat by the fire, his elbows on his knees, staring into the glow. A piece of wood near the hearth caught his eye. It was small, smooth-edged, something he'd whittled without thinking during lonely evenings. He turned it in his hand, tracing the shallow groove of an unfinished carving, a habit born from nights too quiet for grief. He didn't know why he'd kept it. Now, under the dim light, the shape began to look like a letter. Maybe the start of a name. He closed his fist around it before the thought could finish. Behind him, Naomi's breathing slowed. One of the babies whimpered, then quieted, when he laid a hand near the basket. The cabin settled into the sound of fire and wind, 2 forces arguing softly through the night. Jeremiah leaned back against the wall, eyes fixed on the flames, their light painting his scars in copper. Outside, the storm thinned to a hush. Snow kept falling, but gentle now, as if tired. When the last log popped, a glow from the window brushed his shoulder. A lantern swaying out there, faint and far, like a star that refused to die. He rose halfway to look, then froze. The light moved once, twice, then disappeared behind the white. Dawn came late to the ridge. The storm had emptied itself in the night, leaving behind a world made of glass. Trees stiff with ice, sky pale as bone, silence deep enough to hear the slow drip from the eaves. Jeremiah stood outside the cabin, splitting wood, the rhythm of his axe steady, measured. Every strike was an answer to the thoughts he didn't say out loud. Behind the door, Naomi and the babies slept in uneven breaths. The fire still burned low, fed by his habit more than his hope. When the axe blade bit wrong and sparked against a frozen knot, he stopped, leaned on the handle, and listened. A sound drifted up the slope, hooves crunching snow, slow but sure. Not the wind, not a wanderer lost. Someone who knew the way. He reached for the rifle hanging above the doorway, but didn't raise it when the rider came into view. May Whitlock, her coat a patchwork of wool and old leather, cheeks flushed red from the climb. The mule behind her carried a sack and a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Morning, Jeremiah," she called, voice raw from the cold. "Heard the storm near took the ridge clean?" He nodded once. "It near did." May swung down, boots sinking into the drift. She glanced at the cabin, then back at him. "You've got company." He didn't answer, and she didn't press. May was one of the few who'd learned that silence from him wasn't refusal. It was trust. She followed him inside, shaking snow from her shoulders. The air inside was thick with the smell of smoke and milk. 3 tiny bundles lay near the hearth, and Naomi Hearth looked up from the quilts, her face still pale but no longer gray. May froze, taking in the scene. The woman's bandaged wrists, the infants, the man standing between them and the door. "Good Lord," May whispered. "Don't," Jeremiah said softly. "She's been through enough." May set the bundle she'd brought onto the table. A few jars, dried bread, a tin of salve. Time 400 mams. Then she crouched beside the babies. "They yours?" Naomi shook her head weakly. "Mine," she said. "But he saved us." May looked to Jeremiah. "You always were a fool for lost things." He said nothing, only poured her a cup of hot water from the kettle. The quiet between them felt like the kind that carried weight, not awkwardness. May sipped, then leaned closer to Naomi. "You'd best know," words traveling fast down in the valley. Naomi blinked, confused. "Ambrose Kincaid's been telling folks you're unstable," May said, voice lowering. "Says you ran off in a fit and took what was his. He's got 3 men riding for proof, and a 4th who likes trouble more than pay." Naomi's fingers clenched the quilt. The color drained from her face as if the storm had found its way back inside her. "He'll come here," she said. Jeremiah turned toward the window. Snowlight filtered through the glass, bright and merciless. "He might," he said. May stood, brushed her knees. "I brought more than bread," she said. "There's medicine in the jar and powder in the bottom sack. Enough if trouble rides this way." Jeremiah's jaw tightened. "I'm not looking for a fight." "Doesn't matter," May said. "Sometimes the fight looks for you." She reached for her gloves. "Keep that fire high. It's going to get colder before it gets right." When she left, the silence returned, heavier than before. Naomi stared at the door long after it closed. The babies stirred, one letting out a soft cry that broke the stillness like a fragile thread. Jeremiah crossed the room, lifted a small piece of wood from the shelf. He sat by the fire, took out his knife, and began to carve. The grain split easy beneath the blade, curling into pale ribbons that fell onto his boots. One name took shape, then another, then the third. Lila, Mercy, Dawn. Each letter steady, slow, as if saying them aloud would make them real. When he hung the 3 wooden plaques above the hearth, the light from the fire touched them, turning the letters the color of honey. Naomi watched in silence, her hands trembling in her lap. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the faint whistle of someone or something moving down the valley. It rose, broke, then faded, a sound half human, half storm. Jeremiah looked toward the window, but saw only white. Night settled again over Coal Ridge, softer this time, but no less cold. The snow outside gleamed faintly under a waning moon, and the cabin's single window glowed with the tired pulse of firelight. Inside, the room breathed with the slow rhythm of survival. Crack, hiss, sigh. Naomi Hearth sat near the hearth, her shoulders wrapped in Jeremiah's spare coat, watching the flame bend in the draft. The babies slept in a shallow basket lined with rabbit fur. Their tiny fists twitched as though they dreamed of warmth. Jeremiah sat a few feet away, mending a tear in his saddle strap, the leather creaking faintly each time the needle passed through. Neither spoke. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was heavy, respectful, the kind that comes when words might wound more than heal. After a long while, Naomi said, "You don't ask questions." Jeremiah didn't look up. Didn't seem right. She turned her gaze back to the fire. Maybe it ain't right to keep quiet either. The needle paused. The log popped. He waited. "I was 17 when he married me," she began. "Ambrose Kincaid. He was 35. My father said I'd never go hungry. That was his way of blessing it." Her voice trembled on the edge of calm, steadying only when she looked at the sleeping children. He liked things that didn't talk back. His horses, his men, his wife. First daughter, he frowned. Second, he stopped speaking to me. Third, her voice thinned, scraping low. He said I'd cursed the house, called me empty where it mattered. That night, he and his brothers tied me to the post behind the barn, told me if the snow didn't take me, I deserved to live. Guess it did half of both. The fire hissed sharply, and for a moment Jeremiah thought it might go out. He set aside the leather and stood. His boots made no sound on the wood floor. He took a clean rag from the table, dipped it into warm water, and knelt beside her. Time 8 hums. She tried to flinch when he touched her wrist, but she didn't have the strength. He cleaned the wounds where the barbed wire had bitten deep. Her skin was torn, the edges bruised dark. She watched his hands move, slow and careful, as if he were tending something sacred. "I used to think," she whispered, "that silence would keep me safe. That if I just stopped fighting, he'd stop hating." Jeremiah wrung out the cloth, steam rising between them. "Did he?" "No," she said, her voice small. "He just got quieter." The firelight reached her face, its bruises, its strength. Something in her tone loosened something buried in him, a memory he'd packed away years before. For a heartbeat, the cabin faded, and he was back in another winter, holding a fevered woman whose breath came in shallow gasps. A child's cry, brief and final, had cut through that silence too. He blinked hard, the past dissolving like smoke. When he looked back at Naomi, she was staring into the flames. Her tears didn't fall. They froze where they formed, glinting in the light. "You don't have to tell me more," he said quietly. "I need to," she answered. "Otherwise it'll stay loud in my head." He nodded once, wrapping her wrist in clean linen, the kind he'd kept for his own injuries and never used. Outside, the wind shifted direction. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled, its call long and lonely, carried thin through the trees. The sound made the babies stir. Naomi turned toward the basket, her whole body tense until they settled again. Jeremiah rose, placed another log on the fire. The flames licked high, throwing light across the rough walls. It flickered over the carved names above the hearth. Lila, Mercy, Dawn. Each letter catching gold for a moment, before dimming again. Naomi followed his gaze. You did that for them? He nodded. Names ought to stay where they're loved. Something in her face softened, just a little. The tremor in her voice faded, replaced by quiet fatigue. You don't know what he'll do to get them back. Jeremiah met her eyes then, and the steadiness there was its own promise. I reckon I do. For the first time, Naomi looked at him not as a rescuer, but as someone who might understand what it means to lose everything and still keep going. Her lips parted, as if to say more, but the fire snapped, startling her. Jeremiah reached for the kettle, poured hot water into a tin cup, and set it beside her. The scent of pine smoke rose between them. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the ghost of something old that hadn't finished haunting him. He flexed them once, quietly. The babies murmured, the smallest one sighing in her sleep. Naomi closed her eyes, whispering a line he could barely hear. If God meant to kill me, he missed his chance. Jeremiah didn't answer. He looked down at his calloused palms, at the faint tremor still running through them, and for a brief, sharp moment, he could almost feel another, smaller hand resting there, one he hadn't held long enough. He closed his fists slowly, the firelight flickering across his knuckles. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Fine, silent, endless. Morning crept in without warmth. The storm had passed, but the cold stayed behind, crawling through the chinks of the cabin walls and pooling at Jeremiah's boots. A faint light pushed through the frosted window, more gray than gold. He sat by the hearth long before dawn, elbows on his knees, watching the fire lose its edge. Behind him, Naomi and the children slept in a woven hush. He hadn't meant to stay awake, but sleep had been a stranger for years, and the woman's words from the night before kept circling in his mind. The sound of her saying, "If God meant to kill me." He'd heard faith break before, but never spoken so softly. The smallest child stirred, a whimper cutting through the quiet. Jeremiah leaned over, checked the blanket. The baby's fingers had escaped their wrap, curling in the air like roots searching for soil. He pressed her hand between his palms, felt the fragile beat there, then tucked it back beneath the quilt. The touch brought a memory, uninvited and sharp. Another winter. Another small hand. Limp and cooling too fast. His wife, Lillian, whispering prayers that froze before reaching heaven. The baby's breath fading against his chest before he could name her. He'd buried them both when the thaw came. in a place the snow never reached twice. Since then, he'd built fences higher than words and let silence be his shelter. He looked now at the woman sleeping by the hearth, at the three girls breathing faint steam into the air, and something in him shifted, an ache with edges, the kind that could either heal or ruin a man. He reached for the coat hanging near the door and pulled a small box from its pocket. Inside lay a round piece of wood, smooth as bone, half-carved and forgotten. A single curved line marked what was meant to be the start of a name. He set it on his palm and whispered, "Didn't even finish, you little one." Then, quieter, still, "Maybe this time, I'll get it right." When Naomi woke, the light had changed, thin, wintry, spilling pale over the floorboards. Jeremiah was by the fire again, knife in hand, wood shavings curling at his boots. She didn't speak, only watched his shoulders move. "You never sleep?" she asked finally. "Not much use in it," he said, not looking up. The blade turned. He wiped the dust with his thumb, then leaned forward, feeding the fire another log. Naomi's gaze followed his hands, rough and steady. She saw the new carving now, a small disc of pine with shallow letters cut into it, not yet sanded smooth. "What's that for?" she asked. He hesitated. "Something I owed." The baby nearest to him whimpered. He set the carving aside and lifted her. "She's hungry." He warmed the milk in his palm before giving it by spoon, patient as he'd been the night before. Naomi watched, her lips parting once as if to speak, but she said nothing. Outside, a crow called once from a distant pine, the sound too dark for the pale morning. Jeremiah's eyes flicked toward the window. The crow took off, wings slapping hard against the still air. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw movement lower down the slope, something dark against the white. But when he blinked, it was gone. Naomi noticed the way his shoulders tensed. "What is it?" "Could be nothing," he said. "Could be a man. From him, maybe." He turned back to the fire, but his hand lingered near the rifle leaning by the door. The flame reflected in his eyes, a steady orange rim around the black. Naomi drew the coat tighter around her. "I can leave," she said suddenly, "if it brings trouble." "You're not leaving." His voice was quiet, but it left no room for reply. "No one dies out there for that man's peace of mind." For a long moment, only the fire spoke. The babies slept again, their tiny chests rising in unison. Jeremiah reached for the unfinished carving, turning it over once more. On one side was the faint groove of the old name, long lost. On the other, he began to trace new ones. Lila, Mercy, Dawn. He didn't finish. The knife paused mid-stroke. Something caught his attention. A sound just beyond the wall, faint but clear. The crunch of hooves, where no one should be riding this early. He stood, moved to the window, careful not to stir the floorboards. Out in the thinning mist, a line of tracks snaked down the hill, fresh, sharp-edged. His jaw tightened. He knew the shape of that shoe print. The steel ridge at the toe belonged to the Valley Riders. He turned back toward Naomi, who was already awake and watching him, eyes wide but calm. "Someone's been here," he said. She nodded slowly, the color draining from her face. Jeremiah's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then we best get ready for them to come back." Outside, the crow returned, landing on the fence post where her life had almost ended. It shook the snow from its wings and stared toward the cabin. Inside, Jeremiah set the carving on the mantel, unfinished. The fire burned steady, but the warmth felt fragile now, like something borrowed. And somewhere in the trees below, a horse snorted once, unseen. By afternoon, the sky had gone the color of pewter. The air held that tight, brittle stillness that came before another storm. Jeremiah stood outside the cabin, hammer in hand, driving a second crossbar across the doorframe. Each strike echoed sharp against the valley's silence. Every sound here seemed to carry farther when trouble was near. He paused to listen. Nothing but the slow grind of wind through pine and the creak of ice sliding off branches. His breath clouded pale in front of him. He checked the latch twice before stepping back inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. Naomi was by the hearth, wrapping the girls in clean cloth torn from an old curtain. The babies fussed, soft and small, but the rhythm of her hands calmed them fast. She had color in her face again, her lips no longer cracked from the cold. "You've done that before," Jeremiah said quietly. "Had to," she answered. "No one else would." He nodded. She tied off the last corner and sat still for a moment, staring into the fire as if it might give her an answer. The wind sighed against the shutters. Jeremiah knelt by the trap door leading to the root cellar and pulled it open. Inside, jars of beans and dried apples waited beside a stack of kindling. He moved half the food down there, then set a jug of water beside it. When he climbed back up, he said, "If I tell you to go, you take them. Follow the creek down the east slope. Don't stop till you reach the flats." Naomi met his eyes. "And you?" "I'll stay." Her jaw tensed, but she didn't argue. She only nodded once. Then, as if remembering something old, she reached into her skirt pocket and drew out a length of red ribbon, frayed and faded. "What's that?" Jeremiah asked. "My mother used to tie these in the woods when she picked herbs," Naomi said. "Said they'd bring her home when the trails forgot the way." She turned the ribbon between her fingers. "She taught me how to leave marks, quiet ones." Jeremiah's brow furrowed. "You mean for tracking?" "For finding," Naomi said. Then she rose, walked to the window, and tied the ribbon around the latch. The red shimmered faintly against the gray light, small but certain. "If I have to go, I'll mark the path." He studied her. How steady her hands were now, how her shoulders no longer slumped. "You sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure I won't wait to die again," she said. The words came out soft, but iron true. Jeremiah gave a slow nod. respect quiet in his eyes. He went back to work, reinforcing the shutters with strips of old saddle leather. The smell of pine sap and smoke thickened the air. Evening slid in before they noticed. The snow began again, light at first, then heavier, falling straight down without wind. The ridge turned to a white wall outside their window. Naomi sat near the door, a knife in her lap, shaving a piece of bark with careful, deliberate strokes. "What are you doing?" Jeremiah asked. "Making a sign," she said. She turned the bark to show him. A small arrow carved into it, pointing east. "If something happens, I'll keep leaving these, so someone can find us." He stared at the mark, then at her. "You think ahead. You learn to, when you've been hunted." The fire cracked behind them, sending sparks up the chimney. The light died early that evening. What passed for sunset was only a pale bruise behind the clouds, fading before it ever turned gold. Snow drifted sideways across the ridge, each gust carrying a low moan that made the cabin timbers shiver. Inside, the fire burned high, but the warmth couldn't quite keep up with the fear sitting between them. Naomi stood by the window, one of the babies asleep against her chest. Jeremiah checked the rifle by the door, pulling the lever once, quiet as breath. "They'll come before dark's gone," he said. She didn't answer, only tightened the blanket around the child and looked toward the tree line. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. Rode this way at noon." He crossed the room, took another log, set it on the flames. Sparks jumped, hissed, then settled. "If they knock, I'll talk first. You stay by the hearth." Naomi's eyes found him in the flicker. "You think talking will fix it?" "Maybe not," he said, "but I'd rather meet them standing." For a long time, the world outside was only wind. Then came the sound, distant hooves crunching ice, growing closer. The babies stirred in their sleep. Naomi rocked them, her heartbeat quick and hard beneath their small bodies. Jeremiah stepped onto the porch. The snow was knee-deep now, the air bright with cold. 3 riders approached through the white, dark coats, wide-brimmed hats pulled low. Their horses blew mist into the dusk. The man in front raised a hand. "Evening," he called. "We're looking for a woman. Name's Hearth. Took something that don't belong to her." Jeremiah said nothing, his breath fogging in front of him. The riders stopped a few paces short of the porch. "You Cole?" the man asked. "That's right. Word is she's holed up here. You hand her over, we'll be on our way." Jeremiah's voice was calm, steady, like a man stating weather. "She was left to die. She's not yours to take." The man leaned forward in the saddle. "You don't know who you're crossing, rancher. Ambrose Kincaid's got papers saying she's his wife, and them girls are his blood. Law's on his side." Jeremiah's eyes stayed level. "Maybe, but law ain't here tonight." The rider's mouth twisted. "Then it'll come with us tomorrow." He tugged his reins, turning the horse just enough to spit into the snow. "We'll be back when the storm clears. Tell her to pack what she stole." They wheeled their horses around, snow spraying up, white against their dark coats. Jeremiah watched them vanish into the trees, the sound of hooves fading into nothing. When he stepped back inside, Naomi was by the door, her face colorless but dry. "They saw me?" she asked. "No," he said, "but they'll be sure enough next time." She lowered her eyes. The fire popped, casting a quick light across her cheekbones. "Then you should send us away." "I told you," Jeremiah said quietly. "No one leaves this ridge to die." She looked up, her voice breaking. "You can't fight men like him. He has money. He has law." Jeremiah shook his head. "He's got fear. That's all men like that ever hold. Take it away." And they crumble. Naomi stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly, a kind of strength returning to her face. "Then I'll learn not to fear." He saw something change in her eyes then, a spark that wasn't just survival. He turned toward the door, checking the bolt again. "Storm's not done. When it lifts, they'll come. So we plan." He drew a line in the dust on the table, tracing the valley slope. "You follow the creek if it comes to running. It twists east, keeps low. Stay in its bed. Sound won't carry." Naomi memorized it, her fingers tracing the air above his marks. The firelight touched their hands, hers small and pale, his broad and cracked. For a moment, they stayed close enough that neither could pretend indifference. Outside, thunder rolled once, dry, strange for snow. Naomi flinched. Jeremiah reached for the lamp and turned down the wick. The room fell into half-darkness, the fire a dull red heart beating low. "They'll be back," he murmured. "I know." Neither moved. The wind pressed hard against the walls, and for a moment, the ribbon on the window fluttered like it wanted to escape. Jeremiah's eyes stayed fixed on the door, his jaw set. "When they come again, they'll find we've already decided how this ends." Naomi's voice, low and sure, answered from the shadows. "So have I." A gust hit the roof, shaking loose a drift of snow. It fell heavy onto the porch, muffling everything. Then the sky split open with a flash, and the first rumble of a true storm rolled up the ridge. The storm arrived just after dusk. It came without mercy, wind howling through the pines, snow driving sideways like thrown salt, sky gone white with fury. The cabin shuddered under the weight of it. Inside, the fire flared and snapped, a small defiance against a world turning wild. Jeremiah pulled on his coat, heavy, lined with wool. The buttons felt colder than bullets. Naomi was at the hearth, bundling the girls, one in her arms, one tied close to her chest, the smallest cradled at her back. The ribbon she had hung by the window now fluttered wildly, the color of blood against the pale storm light. "They'll use the weather," Jeremiah said, voice low. "Storm covers sound, covers tracks. Good time to hunt." Naomi's jaw tightened. "Then it's a good time to vanish." He nodded once. "Follow the creek. Keep low. There's a bend past the rock face. It'll hide you till morning. Don't stop unless you have to." Her eyes met his, the fire reflecting in both. And you? I'll make them chase the wrong trail. She swallowed hard. You can't fight them all. Not planning to. He reached for the lamp, lit it, then doused it halfway to make the flame small. Just need them to think I am. He moved with quiet purpose, pulled an old coat from the peg, stuffed it with straw, and set it upright by the fence. He hung a hat on its head, tied a lamp behind a fallen log so the light threw a long, false shadow. From the distance, it would look like a man moving by fire. Naomi watched, half in fear, half in awe. The wind roared louder now, rattling the shutters. The babies whimpered, restless from the noise. Jeremiah turned back, knelt beside her. When the time comes, you run, he said. Don't look back. The woods will tell you where to go. Her breath hitched. Jeremiah. He reached up and brushed his thumb once across her cheek. The gesture tender, steady. Go. She pressed her forehead to his for one brief heartbeat, then stood. He wrapped his old elk fur cloak around her shoulders and tucked a pouch into her satchel. Jerky, dried apples, a small flask. Then he slipped a short blade into her hand. If they catch up, he said, don't hesitate. Her fingers trembled around the handle, but she nodded. I won't. He opened the back door. The wind slammed into them like a wall, snow swirling so thick it erased the world beyond 3 steps. Naomi stepped into it, clutching the children close, her breath sharp and fast. Jeremiah stood in the doorway until she disappeared into the blur of white. Only the red ribbon she wore on her wrist marked her shape, before the storm swallowed it whole. He shut the door. For a moment, the cabin felt too big, too quiet. Then he went to work. He dragged a spare coat over the broom handle and propped it by the southern fence, letting the wind move it like a man shifting his weight. He lit a small fire down the slope, just enough smoke to lure eyes the wrong way. By the time he came back inside, his coat was soaked and his hands burned from the cold. He stripped off the gloves and fed the fire another log. The house smelled of pine, smoke, and faint milk, ghosts of what warmth meant. He took the rifle and loaded it, each metallic click swallowed by the storm. For a moment, he let himself look at the carved names above the hearth. Lila, Mercy, Dawn. The letters caught the firelight like small prayers. He bowed his head once, then blew out the lantern. The wind screamed through the gaps in the cabin boards, carrying with it faint shapes. Men shouting over the storm, the clatter of hooves, a distant whistle. Jeremiah stepped to the window, saw lanterns bobbing in the white. They were coming fast. 3, no, 4 riders, pushing uphill. He moved to the door and waited. The snow stung his face through the cracks. He could feel the rifle's weight, the pull of the trigger smooth and certain beneath his fingers. Outside, one of the men shouted, "There! Firelight! By the fence!" Jeremiah almost smiled. The bait had worked. The voices shifted, fading toward the southern trail. But a 4th shadow lingered, just beyond the trees. The man didn't follow the others. He sat still on his horse. the shape barely visible through the blizzard. Jeremiah felt it, the prickle of recognition, the sense of being watched by someone who wasn't sure what side he stood on. The horse pawed the snow, impatient. Then the figure turned and rode toward the cabin. Jeremiah stepped back, rifle low but ready. The fire crackled once, loud in the emptiness. He waited. The door shuddered against the wind. A fist hit the wood, heavy, twice. Jeremiah's breath fogged in the air. His voice came out like stone grinding on stone. "You've come a long way for a lost cause." And from the other side came a voice he hadn't heard before. Smooth, cold, practiced. "Open up, Cole. Ambrose Kincaid's done waiting." The knock came again, harder this time, shaking the hinges. Jeremiah's hand tightened on the rifle, the wood warm where his palm met it. The fire snapped behind him, throwing red across the floorboards like spilled blood. "Cole!" The voice cut through the storm, sharp and sure. "You've got something belongs to me." Jeremiah drew in one long breath, set the rifle aside, and unbarred the door. The wind exploded inward, carrying snow and the scent of iron. 3 men stood outside, their coats crusted white, faces half hidden beneath wet hats. The one in the middle stepped forward, tall, polished, eyes colder than the mountain air. Ambrose Kincaid. "She's my wife," Ambrose said, not bothering to greet or ask. "And those girls bear my name. You're keeping stolen flesh under your roof." Jeremiah met his gaze, unmoving. "You left her for dead." "That was justice," Ambrose said, a thin smile forming. "She failed her duty. A man's legacy can't live on through daughters." "Then your legacy's worth less than the dirt under their feet," Jeremiah said quietly. The 2 men behind Ambrose shifted, boots creaking, rifles glinting under the lantern light. The third, standing a little apart, didn't move. His hat was pulled low, snow dripping from its brim. Jeremiah's eyes lingered on him for half a second too long. Something about the man's stillness felt familiar. Ambrose took another step up the porch. "You think you're some hero, taking in another man's wife? That mountain won't hide you. Law's on my side." Jeremiah shook his head. "Law's just ink. This here's ground. And on this ground, she's free." Ambrose's jaw flexed. "You forget your place, rancher." Jeremiah's voice came low. "I remember it fine. It's standing between you and anyone you think you own." The words hung there, heavy and dangerous. One of Ambrose's men, broad-shouldered, mean-eyed, snorted. "Enough talking." He lifted his rifle. "Time 400 pounds. Before he could aim, Jeremiah's hand darted down, pulling his own gun from the holster. The movement was clean, calm. He didn't fire, but the message landed. "Lower it," Jeremiah said softly. "No one needs dying tonight." The man hesitated. Ambrose raised a hand, half-smile returning. "You won't shoot," he said. "You're alone. You've got no reason to die for her." Jeremiah's eyes narrowed. "You ever lose a child, Ambrose?" Ambrose frowned. "What's that to you?" Everything, Jeremiah said. For a moment, neither man moved. The snow swirled between them like smoke. Then Ambrose laughed, a dry, hollow sound. You don't scare me. I ain't trying to, Jeremiah said. Just reminding you that some things stay buried better than others. Ambrose's face hardened. You'll regret that. He nodded once to his men. The broad-shouldered one stepped forward, raising his rifle butt high. Jeremiah braced, but before the strike landed, a voice cut through the wind from the side, low, deliberate, carrying weight. Hold up, Tom. It was the quiet rider, the one who'd stood apart. He lifted his head now, and Jeremiah saw his face, scar along the jaw, eyes the color of ash. Recognition flickered in both of them. Rory Hanks. Years ago, Jeremiah had pulled him out of a frozen creek when his horse slipped through the ice. A favor repaid once, never forgotten. Ambrose turned sharply. You got something to say, Hanks? Rory's jaw worked. Ain't right, beating on a man who's unarmed. Ambrose's voice cut like glass. He's hiding my wife. Rory's gaze flicked back to Jeremiah, then down to the ground. Then let the storm take him. No need to bloody our hands. Ambrose glared, but didn't argue. He gave a short, cruel nod to the other two. Fine. We'll come back at first light. Maybe he'll see reason once the dark's done. He turned, coat flaring in the wind. The others followed, their shapes swallowed fast by the constant sun, white. Only Rory lingered for a moment longer, staring at Jeremiah through the falling snow. Then he tipped his hat, a small, almost invisible gesture, and rode after them. Jeremiah stood in the doorway long after the sound of hooves faded. His shoulder throbbed where the rifle butt had grazed it, but the ache was distant, unimportant. He closed the door, barred it again. The fire burned low, smoke curling blue against the rafters. From somewhere beyond the ridge came a faint echo, perhaps thunder, perhaps hooves turning back. He couldn't tell. He sat by the hearth, listening to the wind pull at the roof, and thought of Naomi out there, following the creek, the red ribbon flashing in the dark. He whispered to no one, "Keep her safe." Then he loaded the rifle again, slow and steady. The next knock would not find him unready. The wind had lost its voice by dawn. It moved in low whispers now, brushing frost from the trees as if erasing the night. Jeremiah hadn't slept. He sat by the hearth with the rifle laid across his knees, the last of the fire burning to coals. His shoulder throbbed where the blow had landed, but the pain kept him steady. It reminded him he was still here, still standing guard over what mattered. Outside, the storm had quieted enough to see the slope again, a world remade in white. Every print, every trace of last night's struggle, half buried, but not gone. He stepped to the window, breath fogging the glass. In the distance he saw movement, dark shapes cutting across the ridge. They were coming back. He slung the rifle, opened the door, and stepped into the cold. His boots sank deep with each step, the sound sharp in the hush. He made it halfway down the path before stopping, at the same fence where he'd found Naomi days ago. The wire still hung there, rusted, broken, a monument to what men called justice. The first rider appeared through the trees, Ambrose, his coat flapping like a banner, eyes bright with fury. 3 others followed close, rifles drawn. Behind them, the sky glowed pale with weak sunlight, the kind that gave no warmth. Jeremiah raised a hand. "That's far enough." Ambrose laughed. "You think you can stop us?" "I think I can stand between you and the wrong you're fixin' to do." Ambrose lifted his pistol. "You're not even law. Don't need to be." The gun cracked before the echo formed. The bullet grazed Jeremiah's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He hit the snow hard, rolled once and came up on one knee, rifle in hand. His breath came fast, white in the cold. Ambrose cocked his pistol again, but before he could fire, the man on his right moved. "Don't," said Rory Hanks. Ambrose turned, eyes narrowing. "You planning to forget who pays you?" Rory didn't lower his rifle, but neither did he aim it. His gaze flicked toward Jeremiah, then back to Ambrose. "There's a line, boss. We're already on the wrong side of it." Ambrose's lip curled. "You're soft." "Maybe," Rory said, voice low. "But I've seen enough men buried for the wrong reasons." Jeremiah stood slowly, blood soaking through his sleeve. "You can still ride away," he said. "All of you." Ambrose sneered. "Not before I take back what's mine." Another sound broke through then, a shout from the woods, firm, commanding. "Hold your fire!" All heads turned. Horses broke through the trees, 5 of them, led by Sheriff Beaumont, coat flapping behind him, badge catching the weak light. Beside him rode May Whitlock, cheeks red, rifle steady. 2 deputies followed close. The sheriff's horse reared to a stop, snow spraying in arcs. "Ambrose Kincaid," he called, voice carrying over the ridge. "By witness account and statement under oath, you're under arrest for attempted murder and abuse under state code." Ambrose froze, disbelief cutting his features sharp. "You got no proof?" May raised her voice from behind the sheriff. "We've got plenty." Naomi Hearth made it down the ridge before sunrise, told her story herself. Jeremiah exhaled, the breath shaking out of him like the last note of a long prayer. He lowered his rifle, but didn't take his eyes off Ambrose. Kincaid's pistol hand trembled. "She's lying." "Maybe," the sheriff said, "but lying folk don't ride through a blizzard to find me. And law don't wait on your permission." He motioned with his head. "Deputies." The 2 men dismounted, rifles aimed. For a heartbeat, Ambrose's rage flared. He swung his pistol toward Jeremiah again. But before he could pull the trigger, Rory Hanks's hand moved. A small, quick motion that knocked Ambrose's arm wide. The shot went high, harmless into the trees. The sheriff fired once in reply, not to kill, but close enough to make the decision clear. Ambrose's gun fell into the snow. The deputies rushed forward, dragging him down, metal cuffs snapping shut around his wrists. As they pulled the others from their saddles, Rory lingered, his eyes meeting Jeremiah's one last time. Snow drifted between them. Rory gave a small, deliberate nod, part apology, part farewell. then turned his horse away, riding into the gray without a word. When the noise settled, Naomi appeared from the trees behind the sheriff. Her cloak was torn, her face streaked with cold, but her eyes were clear and burning. She ran to Jeremiah, dropping to her knees beside him. "You're hurt," she said. "Not enough to matter," he murmured. She pressed her hand over his bleeding shoulder, firm and steady. "You promised you wouldn't die here." "I'm keeping that promise." He smiled then, a thin, tired curve that softened when she did. The sheriff watched for a moment, then turned away, barking orders to his men. When Ambrose was hauled down the trail, Jeremiah looked to Naomi, his voice barely a whisper. "You came back." "I told you," she said, "I won't run anymore." Snow began to fall again, slow and quiet, as if the mountain itself was finally exhaling. By morning, the storm had gone. The mountains breathed again. Mist rose off the pines in thin, ghostly ribbons, and the snow along the eaves melted in slow, silver drops. Jeremiah woke to the sound of them falling, each one marking time like a quiet clock. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and goat's milk. Someone had fed the fire. He turned his head and saw Naomi kneeling by the hearth, her hair loose, her hands steady as she poured hot water into a bowl. The girls slept near the fire, 3 small bundles of warmth, their soft breaths rising and falling in rhythm with the crackling logs. "Don't sit up too quick," Naomi said without turning. "You'll tear the stitches." Jeremiah blinked, tried to speak, but the words caught on a dry throat. "You sewed me?" She nodded. "May brought a needle. Said it wasn't the first time she'd patched a stubborn man." He almost smiled, then winced instead. His shoulder burned where the bullet had grazed. Naomi dipped a cloth in the bowl, wrung it out, and pressed it gently to the wound. The heat bit, but he didn't pull away. Outside, hooves shuffled, the sheriff's horse, impatient for the road. Beaumont stood near the porch, finishing a note in his ledger while May packed her satchel. When Jeremiah tried to stand, the sheriff stepped to the doorway. "Sit easy, Cole," he said. "It's handled. Kincaid's on his way down the valley under guard." Jeremiah nodded. "And the others?" "2 riding with him," the sheriff said. "The 3rd, Hanks, didn't wait for thanks." Jeremiah's eyes lowered. "He paid what he owed." "Seems so," Beaumont said quietly. "World's strange that way. Sometimes the right thing's done for reasons we'll never know." He tipped his hat, glanced once toward Naomi, then mounted his horse. May followed, calling over her shoulder, "Keep it clean, or you'll have more than a scar to remember him by." Naomi smiled faintly, waving after her. When the sound of hooves faded down the slope, silence folded back into the cabin. Only the fire spoke now, soft, patient, alive. Jeremiah looked around the room, at the low shelves, the quilts, the faint scent of bread May had left behind. "Feels different," he said. Naomi met his gaze. "Because it's ours now." He didn't answer, but something in his chest eased. He moved to the window, leaned against the frame, and looked out. The world was washed clean. The line of the creek shimmered under the morning sun. He thought of how close death had come to that same door, and how quietly life had stepped back in. Naomi joined him, holding a small wooden box. "Found this while you slept." Inside lay 3 tiny pieces of carved wood, smoothed and oiled. Each bore a letter, LMD. "They'll hang above the cradle again," she said. "Only this time under a roof that won't let the wind through." He touched the edge of one carving, thumb tracing its groove. "Never thought I'd see peace in this place." Naomi turned to him, eyes reflecting firelight. "Peace isn't something you find, Jeremiah. It's something you choose to keep." Her words lingered long after she moved away to tend the kettle. Jeremiah stepped outside, careful with his wounded shoulder. The air was cool, soft, full of thawing scents: earth, bark, ash. He walked to the fence where the barbed wire still hung, cut it loose, and coiled it into a bundle. The sharp ends pricked his hands, but he didn't stop until the fence stood clean and open, facing the valley. When he came back inside, Naomi was waiting with a tin cup of pine tea. He took it, their fingers brushing. The moment stretched, quiet, simple, sure. He looked at the girls sleeping near the hearth, and then at her. "You brought them through the dark," he said. "So did you." He nodded once, as if sealing a vow neither had to speak aloud. Then he reached into a small crate by the door and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. A horseshoe, polished bright, strung with 3 small bells. "Made it before the storm," he said. "Figured every home needs its own sound." Naomi took it gently, eyes softening. "It's beautiful." He handed her a nail and the small hammer. "You hang it." She walked to the doorway, lifted the horseshoe high, and drove the nail in with one clean strike. The metal rang out, a clear, low tone that lingered in the rafters, steady as breath. Jeremiah smiled. "Guess that means the wind's welcome now." Naomi looked toward the window, where sunlight crept across the floorboards, warm and golden. "Maybe it always was," she said. The bell chimed again as the door eased shut, and for the first time since winter began, the sound wasn't a warning. It was home. Spring came quietly to Coal Ridge. It didn't arrive with trumpet calls or the sudden thaw of a flood. It crept in small signs. The first robin daring the fence post at dawn. The drip of snowmelt finding its way through moss. The smell of damp pine and turned soil. For weeks, Jeremiah and Naomi worked without saying much. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer a thing of fear or distance, but of comfort. The kind that fills a home better than words. The cabin, once a refuge built from necessity, began to shift into something warmer. Jeremiah patched the roof and sanded the splintered doorframe. Naomi scrubbed the soot from the windows, letting the light spill in unfiltered. The air carried the scent of fresh timber, boiled coffee, and the faint sweetness of baking bread. The 3 girls, Lila, Mercy, and Dawn, had grown loud with life. Their laughter rolled through the clearing, chasing away the last ghosts of winter. They toddled barefoot through the yard, chasing chickens and one another. Their dresses stitched from mismatched fabric Naomi had saved from old quilts. Each time they laughed, Jeremiah felt something deep inside him loosen, a knot he hadn't known he carried since the day he'd buried his first child. He built them a swing between two young aspens near the creek. When he tested it, the ropes creaked softly, and Naomi leaned on the fence watching. "You spoil them," she said. Jeremiah shrugged, the corner of his mouth lifting. "They deserve the world. Closest thing I can give is a swing." Naomi smiled, that quiet kind that never reached for more than it needed. "You're giving them more than that." He didn't answer, but his eyes stayed on hers longer than he meant them to. Inside, Naomi had made the hearth the center of everything. She taught the girls to say grace before meals, to whisper soft thank yous to the fire each night before bed. "Fire remembers kindness," she told them, and Jeremiah sometimes caught himself believing it. He'd sit by the glow, the smell of stew in the air, and think about how far warmth could reach when someone chose to keep it burning. By mid-spring, word had spread through the valley. Travelers, trappers, and freight riders knew there was a cabin on Coal Ridge where a man could find a hot meal and a clean bed for a few coins, or none, if he was honest about his hunger. Jeremiah didn't plan for it, but he didn't turn anyone away. One evening, as he fixed a wagon wheel for a weary trader, the man said, "Heard folks down at Horseshoe Crossing call this place the Hearth." Jeremiah wiped the sweat from his brow. "Hearth, huh?" The trader nodded. "Said there's light here even in a storm." Jeremiah glanced toward the cabin, where Naomi's silhouette moved behind the curtains, fire flickering around her like a halo. "Guess they're right," he murmured. That night, Naomi found him outside sanding a board. "You heard them call it something?" she asked. "The Hearth," he said. "Seems it stuck." She leaned beside him, the smell of wood dust and lilac clinging to her dress. "Then we'll keep it. Hearth at Coal Ridge. Has a good sound to it." He nodded. "It does." As the days lengthened, so did their peace. Naomi planted herbs, thyme, sage, sweet basil, in a row of clay pots under the windowsill. Jeremiah cleared a plot beyond the shed for potatoes and beans. The rhythm of their days was steady. Dawn chores, noon rest, evening stories told in half-whispers while the fire murmured in agreement. Every now and then, Naomi would stop by the creek at dusk, her reflection rippling in the dark water. She'd think about the fence post she'd once been tied to, now swallowed by spring grass, and feel the strange ache of being alive. Some nights she cried quietly, not from sadness, but because the body remembers pain even when the heart has moved on. Jeremiah never asked about those tears. He only left a warm mug of tea by her side, and sometimes that was enough. One evening, after the girls had gone to sleep, Naomi found Jeremiah on the porch, carving something small from a piece of oak. The lantern beside him cast a soft circle of light that glowed against his weathered face. "What are you making?" she asked. He hesitated, then held it up, a small horse, rough-edged but graceful. "Thought the girls might like something to keep." She took it, running her thumb along the grooves. "You have a gift for turning broken wood into something gentle." He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. Maybe it's all any of us can do. The words hung in the air, fragile and true. Naomi stepped closer, her hand brushing his sleeve. For a moment, she thought he'd pull away. Instead, he turned his hand, caught hers, and held it. There, steady, sure, like anchoring something that had drifted too long. The silence between them deepened, no longer heavy, but full. The lantern flame wavered, painting their faces gold. "I don't have much to give," Jeremiah said quietly. "No rings, no preacher, no promises I ain't certain I can keep." Naomi shook her head. "You already gave me what mattered. You stayed." He looked down at their joined hands. "Then let me give you one more thing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thin string of beads, hand-carved from walnut, polished smooth. 3 smaller ones at the center, lighter in color, each marked with a letter, L, M, D. "For them," he said, "and for you, if you'll have it." Her breath caught. "It's beautiful. Not near as you." She smiled softly, then reached into the cedar chest by the door. From it, she drew out a shawl dyed deep wine red, embroidered with thread dark as night. At one corner, 3 initials stitched in tiny, careful letters. She unfolded it, draped it over her shoulders, and stood before him. "This was meant to be worn when I was safe again," she said. "I guess tonight's that night." He didn't answer. He only stepped forward and took her hand again. The wind stirred around them, brushing the edges of the shawl. Somewhere inside the cabin, the horseshoe chime rang once, a low, mellow note that trembled like breath held too long. They stood there, the 2 of them, neither needing to speak, neither needing to hide. The moon climbed above the ridge, spilling light over the clearing, catching on the carved names above the hearth. Lila, Mercy, Dawn. Inside, the fire burned steady. Outside, the world smelled of soil and rain and the promise of growing things. When Jeremiah finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "You remember what I said the first night?" Naomi's eyes glistened. "You said, 'You're coming with me.'" He nodded, voice softer now. "Guess what I meant was, we're going on, together." Naomi looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. Slow, real, alive. She leaned into his chest, the shawl brushing his jaw, and the sound of her heartbeat folded neatly into the rhythm of the mountain. Behind them, the horseshoe bells chimed again, answering the night wind. And down in the valley, a lone rider paused to watch the light glowing from their window, steady, golden, unafraid. He touched his hat to the air and rode on, leaving the ridge behind. Inside, Naomi and Jeremiah sat by the fire, hands entwined, while the girls dreamed under quilts stitched from the remnants of winter. The mountain outside slept, but the hearth at Coal Ridge burned bright, a small, eternal sun against the dark. It was not a grand ending, nor a miracle. It was something simpler, rarer, the kind of peace that stays. In the quiet glow of the hearth at Coal Ridge, Jeremiah and Naomi remind us that love can still grow, even after the hardest winters of life. Their story isn't about grand gestures or perfect endings. It's about holding on, about finding peace in simple things, a warm fire, a shared smile, the sound of laughter after silence. For those of us who have walked long roads and seen many seasons, their journey feels familiar. It speaks to the kind of love that doesn't fade. It deepens. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to let us know. Leave a comment and share what part of Jeremiah and Naomi's journey stayed with you. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your memories, your reflections. And if you'd like to keep traveling with us through more Western tales, filled with courage, tenderness, and the quiet strength of the human spirit, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to ring the little bell so you never miss another story that might just warm your heart on a cool evening. Thank you for sharing this trail with us. May your hearth always stay bright.